name is Paul Villard. I'm the principal geomorphologist at GEO Morphix. We do a lot of different things that are related to geomorphology and process sedimentology. One of the things I really love doing is developing natural corridor designs. We're standing at the moment in Mattamy's tour development, where there's been about 1.2 kilometers of channel realignment. The realignment was to move the hazards to another location. And by the hazards, we're talking about the erosion hazard and the flooding hazard, and also to provide a naturalized corridor that will provide habitat for both terrestrial and aquatic species. If you'd come out here before this corridor had been installed, what you would have actually seen is a straight agricultural ditch where there's basically agricultural activities all the way to the margins of channels, which means this is a good candidate for restoration. There's a lot of opportunity to build back in the channel morphology, increase sinuosity, rebuild the floodplain, plant native species, and basically build a corridor for the aquatic and terrestrial species that we would have found here in the past before the area had been impacted. What's unique about this channel is that not only is it dealing with the erosion and flood hazards, and what I mean by that is the channel is wide enough to hold the meander belt width, which is basically the extent that we could assume the channel was going to migrate, but it also holds the floodplain. So we basically have meander belt width, a floodplain, then we have a top of slope on a stable slope, and then an erosion setback. And as you can see, that would hold in all the potential erosion and flooding hazards, protecting the development on both sides while allowing the creek to continue to do its natural functions. So the way practitioners design stream corridors has changed a lot over the last 25 years that I've been in the practice. The Tor restoration is a really great example of a lot of different concepts coming together. So one is the idea of degrees of freedom. And what degrees of freedom are is the number of ways the creek can change to adjust to changes in hydrology or sediment supply, meaning that the creek has the opportunity to adjust itself basically within this corridor. So what things did we allow it to adjust? First of all, it can widen, it can narrow, it can become shallow, it can become deeper. We've supplied sediment through the floodplain. If you'd been out here while the construction was occurring, basically we would have dug down to the parent material and then built up basically an alluvium horizon or river sediments. We would have built up these sediments and allowed those sediments to be available for future use by the creek underneath all of the wetland features. It's been over excavated and we've basically brought in granular B. So as the channel migrates back and forth, can encounter those materials and use them to develop new features within the landscape. Other things, by over excavating, we allow the channel to change its slope as required. So we've allowed it to widen, to deepen, to change its slope, and we've also allowed it to migrate back and forth across the floodplain. So basically, it can change also its sinuosity and its overall plan form. Another unique component of this is the mounds that I'm standing on right here. These mounds were actually installed in the floodplain as basically a speed bump with regards to the hydraulics. And what that means is that during a flood event, anything greater than a 2-year event, some of the water is held back temporarily, which forces up the water level, which actually increases the volume of water that can be stored on the floodplain. Why is that important? Because when we move a floodplain, we don't want to just enclose the floodplain, but we want to make sure that we still have the same amount of volumetric storage, because we don't want to impact the channel downstream. Allowing the creek to have that flexibility to adjust and move over time will allow it to deal with things like climate change, will allow it to deal with major storm events, will also allow it to basically adapt to the changing hydrology in this urbanizing landscape. At the moment, we have a great opportunity to see the different features that are on the landscape. As you're watching the drone video, one of the things that will show up is this, all the brown grasses. There's actually grain crops. We use it as a nurse crop to basically protect the ground, because a lot of the native species have to be frozen for a short period so that basically they can break up the seeds so they can basically grow up. And they usually don't grow in the first season, but this is here and these grain products are here to basically protect it from the introduction of non-native weeds. When you look at the drone video, you'll see areas that are brown where we still have the nurse crop, but you can see the cattails in the distance, which are basically the wetland features that were installed. Through the flyover, you'll see a rhythmic pattern. There'll be these speed bumps or higher zones that are basically all brown. Those areas are the elevated features that we have for slowing the water during flood events. You'll then see the very green cattailed areas, some of them with open water. Those are the wetland features that were installed. If you take a close look, you'll likely see another number of raptor poles, which are basically just large dead poles that have been installed to allow raptors to be able to view from a height over the landscape for their hunting and resting. You'll see a number of large mounds that are also brown. They're just large terrestrial mounds that have a different hydro period than other features on the landscape. You'll see rock piles. There'll be a number of hibernacula for snakes to overwinter. There's a number of features on the landscape that you'll be able to see by just watching that the drone flight as it's going over. As you can guess, a complex design like this is not designed and installed by just one person or one company. In this case, it takes a number of disciplines to make a successful design. David Schaeffer Engineering Limited was involved in the civil engineering and the floodplain aspects. NAC Design Strategies did the landscaping. Terrain Group did the overall construction of the project. And GEO Morphix was tasked with developing the low flow channel design, defining what natural habitat features would go in, and generally supporting the overall construction installation along with NAC. Thank you very much for coming out and watching the video. I hope you found it informative.